Will the audience please stand? You may be seated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think Gary's playing a bit of a joke on us today. We thought it was going to be sunny, and here we have some rain, but I think we all know Gary is one of a few tricks up his sleeve, and today is probably no exception. I want to welcome you all here to the memorial services for Donald Gary Young. I want to give a special welcome to the family of Gary Young, also to the friends of the Young family, and also the Young Living family who are here today, and also joining us in simulcast. Last I heard, we have close to 40,000 who are joining us virtually. And when Asia Pacific wakes up, it'll probably be another few tens of thousands. So I think this kind of illustrates the legacy of this great man that we honor today. My name is Ben Riley, and Gary's been a part of my life for about 30 years. Excuse me. In the early 1990s, he approached my family to see if he could grow lavender, clary sage, and botanicals on the Riley family farm just here in Genola, Utah. A few years later, in 1998, Gary helped put me through college when I was working in the warehouse. And the last couple of years, it's been my distinct honor to work side by side with Gary at his company, Young Living Essential Oils. You're going to get a chance to hear from a lot of close friends and, of course, family today. I know that each and every one of you, if you had the opportunity to stand at this podium, you would have stories to tell. You'd have memories to share about how Gary touched your life. And I am very honored and proud to be here with each and every one of you as we commemorate the life of this great man. We're going to start our proceedings today with an invocation offered by Aline Franson, Gary's sister-in-law. Following that, we'll have Matthew French, our chief legal officer at Young Living, will read Gary's obituary. Following Matthew, we'll hear from Jared Turner, our company president at Young Living, who will share some of his thoughts about his time with Gary. And then Jacob will share a tribute to his father and a musical number, and we'll go to that point. Aline.
Our dear, kind Heavenly Father, how grateful we are for the opportunity to gather together as family, friends, and the great Young Living family to share thoughts and music and experiences that we have had with our beloved Gary Young. We're grateful for our Savior, Jesus Christ, for his atonement and resurrection that makes it possible for us to one day see him again and to see all of our loved ones. They're in our thoughts and prayers this day. We're grateful for those who have traveled to be here and for those so many who are listening, and pray that we will be comforted by thy Spirit. We ask thee to bless us that as we celebrate his life, as well as mourn our loss, that we will go forward working on his legacy and sharing it with the world, that the world may have the great blessing and great gifts that thou hast given to us through Gary's hard work and vision of essential oils. We're so grateful for them, grateful that Gary gave his life that we may have those in our lives. We're thankful for our many blessings and pray for comfort this day. Comfort on Mary and Jacob and Joseph, Gary's children, Gary's other family members, and all of us. That we will be comforted and yet strong going forth to see his legacy spread throughout the world. We love thee and are grateful for all thou hast given to us, and say this humbly and gratefully in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
D. Gary Young, the undisputed leader of the essential oil movement and the founder of Young Living Essential Oils, passed away on May 12, 2018 in Salt Lake City, Utah, due to complications following a series of strokes. Gary spent 35 years studying the benefits and perfecting the extraction of essential oils, while building a billion-dollar global business designed to share what he deemed the gift of essential oils with millions of people. Described as a modern pioneer, Gary was part inventor and part historian. His pursuit of new wellness discoveries was rooted in ancient practices, and he attempted to unlock and share the benefits bestowed by herbs, plants, and trees. His research would take him to the remote corners of the earth, and often back in time, to better understand nature's powers that modern society may overlook. Gary was born July 11, 1949, in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and spent his childhood with his parents and 5 siblings in a 20 by 30-foot cabin without running water or electricity. Upon graduating from Chalice High School, he set out to follow his lifelong dream of building a ranch on the Canadian frontier. In 1967, he loaded his belongings into a truck and moved to British Columbia. And in 1968, he was granted 320 acres in the Caribou District, part of the last Homestead Act, where he began his logging. After 5 years of logging and ranching, Gary suffered debilitating injuries in a serious logging accident and was confined to a wheelchair with no expectation of walking again, which caused him to endure years of pain and depression. Channeling his cowboy spirit of not backing down, he began to explore different avenues of better health and well-being, which included the benefits of herbs and good nutrition. It was on this path where Gary's personal journey began, as he wanted to learn everything he could about natural healing, and where he was introduced to essential oils. His determination to achieve physical and emotional well-being, combined with his lifelong love of nature, drove him to learn everything about essential oils, from how they were produced to their wellness benefits. Gary's first true introduction to essential oils came when he attended a medical conference in Geneva, Switzerland, where medical doctors were presenting their research on essential oils. He was enthralled with what he learned and returned to the US with 13 different essential oils to begin his own research. He found the benefits to be astounding and came to the conclusion that this was the path he wanted to pursue. Having grown up farming, it was natural for him to want to learn about growing the plants and producing oils, which took him to France to study and learn the art of distillation under Mr. Henri Vieux, the French father of distillation in Provence, France, the lavender capital of the world, as well as Marcel Espia, the president of the Lavender Growers Association in France for over 20 years. In 1988, Gary sold his research center in Baja California and moved to Reno, Nevada, where he began his essential oil business. A year later, he moved his business to Spokane, Washington, and began building a marketing company to expand his teachings about essential oils and their benefits to as many people as possible. This was the origin of present-day Young Living Essential Oils Company. A rancher at Hardy purchased his first farm of 160 acres in May 1992 in the mountains of St. Mary's, Idaho. On this farm, the first lavender, clary sage, thyme, and peppermint were planted and became a testing ground for new distillation practices. In 1993, Gary's company in Riverton, Utah became Young Living Essential Oils, and in 1994 it was incorporated. He then bought another 160 acres in Mona, Utah in 1995, and he started farming in Utah. Gary then began looking internationally to discover new plants that could be distilled and shared around the world. His path took a unique turn when he was invited to develop a natural medicine program and farming project for Asue University in Cuenca, Ecuador. The climate in Cuenca has only a 3-month growing season, making it not too conducive for farming. So Gary went exploring in Guayaquil, a very busy city on the coast. He found the climate and unidentified plants and trees an irresistible opportunity. Young Living became global when it expanded to Ecuador in 2006 with a 2,300-acre farm. At the same time, he saw an opportunity to help the local children in a rural community of Chongon in the edge of the jungle and founded the Young Living Academy. The doors opened March 2008, and to date, 340 students have attended, with 100% of the students from the first graduating class celebrating their commencement in March 2016. In 2009, Gary went to Yemen. After great persistence, he received a permit to go into the forbidden zone to visit Shabwa, the ancient throne of Queen Sheba. To see the remains of this ancient civilization and to see and document the different frankincense and myrrh species growing in the region. He summarized his experiences in a best-selling historical novel, The One Gift, which depicts life on the camel caravans. It was just one of the dozen books that Gary authored and published. While visiting Oman and walking through a market with thousands of giant bags of frankincense resin piled in the streets, Gary decided to build a distillery in Salalah, the center of frankincense history. And in January 2010, Young Living opened the first large commercial distillery for the extraction of sacred frankincense essential oil in modern times. While fascinated with the teachings of ancient cultures, Gary was also a modern thinker. In 2014, the Young Living Highland Flats Distillery became the first automated, large-capacity, computerized steam distilling facility ever built in the world for essential oils. Young Living's operations currently have a capacity of producing more than 500,000 bottles of oil a day. The company has international offices in Canada, Australia, Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, Croatia, the United Kingdom, Ecuador, and Mexico, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Taiwan, and of course the United States. Young Living has more than 16 corporate and partner farms, over 3,000 employees, and well over 4 million members. Young Living Essential Oils will continue to grow and share Gary's vision around the world. Gary's research led him to the far corners of the earth and to unprecedented findings that improve health and wellness. But perhaps the most important role essential oils played in his life was bringing him together with his wife, Mary, of 25 years. They met at an expo in the Salt Palace in the center of Salt Lake City and married in 1994. The couple together have 2 sons, Jacob and Joseph. Today, Mary continues to serve as CEO of Young Living, the company they founded together. Mary's experience as a networking distributor prior to Young Living and her business experience give her an unusual balance of understanding in this amazing essential oil company they built together. They were the perfect match, with Gary the visionary and Mary the realist. Mary will continue to carry Gary's vision forward with a unique understanding of her visionary husband and with an extraordinary executive staff who will carry on Gary's torch forever. We love you, Gary.
Thanks, Matt. I was doing pretty good until I saw that cowboy hat come out. It's been a hard week, and it reminded me of a night I spent with Gary in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, scrambling from Western wear store to Western wear store trying to find the perfect cowboy hat. He loved his Western wear. As you heard in Gary's inspiring obituary, you can see why we affectionately call Gary the most interesting man in the world. Overcoming tremendous adversity and poverty, disabling injury and ridicule, fostered in him an unstoppable desire to help others in need and to serve God. As Gary once said, "Whatever path I walked, God was my partner." After my terrible accident at age 24, I promised God if He gave me back my legs, I would spend the rest of my life serving His children. Gary was a healthy mix of Indiana Jones, John Wayne, with a touch of Chuck Norris. He was a cowboy, inventor, botanist, farmer, explorer, jouster, author, businessman, philanthropist, adventure healer, and he was my friend and mentor, and he was that to many of you. He was a master craftsman who learned the craft of distillation in France from the families who had distilled lavender for generations, then brought the craft to North America where he perfected it. Everything about Gary was bigger than life. his smile, his curiosity, his laugh, his love, and most importantly, his dream. All of us sitting here today at this beautiful farm are here in fulfillment of that dream. From the millions of Young Living members around the world to the 3,000 corporate employees and many others, we are all manifestations of his original vision. Around the world, the name Gary Young is cherished. Why is it cherished? Because he connected people to their purpose, to their own personal why, allowing them to live an empowered entrepreneurship life. He advocated for natural healing as he introduced essential oils and their healing properties to the mainstream. He connected people to the earth through the farming experiences, letting people plant and harvest botanicals with their own hands, to drive tractors and participate in the distillation process. The memories I have of Gary have come flooding back this week. I will miss the 5 a.m. phone calls to go snowmobiling, the midnight emails celebrating a recent draft horse show win, crisscrossing the globe in helicopters, planes, boats, dog sleds, motorcycles, and sandrails. There was always a lesson in these adventures that we all participated in with Gary. I learned a valuable lesson in how important it is to experience a farm firsthand when I crisscrossed farmland in Serbia with Gary, searching for suitable ground to grow helichrysum. When Gary found a farm that he thought was potentially suitable, we walked out and walked around the freshly tilled soil. He reached down and picked up 2 dirt clods. And he smelled the dirt clods and he said, "The only way to know if this dirt is good enough is if it's sweet. Taste it." He popped a dirt clod in his mouth. I popped one in my mouth. I tasted and swallowed it and didn't realize that Gary had spit his out. I'll always have a piece of farming and Serbia with me, always. He had a great sense of humor. That same trip, the next day, we went and toured a Blue Yarrow distillery. And as many of you know, Blue Yarrow, like Blue Tansy, has a chemical constituent called camelazine that's a beautiful blue hue. Gary said, "Jared, Blue Yarrow is amazing for the skin." And I thought, all of these premature wrinkles Gary's given me from this stress, maybe I could use it. So I covered my face in Blue Yarrow and everybody started laughing. And I went to the mirror and discovered why. In the bathroom, my face was dyed the same beautiful blue hue. I looked like a Smurf. And I tried to wash it off with soap and water, and it did not come out. And I came out and I said this to Gary. "Gary, I tried to wash it off and it wouldn't come out." And he said, "I know." So I spent the rest of that day a much chagrined shade of blue as Gary laughed the entire day. Gary had a childlike joy and curiosity that you all know well, that smile and look. One time with our diamonds in Oman, beautiful country south of Saudi Arabia, we were touring the ancient frankincense trails in our distillery there. We had a dinner on the beach of the Arabian Sea. We were all dressed up fairly nicely for the dinner, and Gary came over and said, "Let's run into the ocean, into the waves." There were big waves coming in. I said, "Okay." So we ran into the ocean in our jeans and cowboy boots and buttoned-up shirts, and a huge wave came over and took Gary under the water. And I pulled him up because I'm a little bit taller than he is. Pulled him up, and we were okay. But as he came out of the water, the fear instantly passed, and it was that look of childlike joy that we've all seen. The question I get most from people now is, what can I do personally, each of you, to keep Gary's legacy alive in our lives? Gary, if you were here today, I would wager would tell you to heal, to be healers. He would say there are enough marketers, salespeople, business people in the world. What the world needs more of today are healers. People who give to others without expecting anything in return. This company, this movement was founded on the notion of healing. He would ask for each of you to care for the other and to extend that community wider and wider until the whole earth is taken up in Gary's vision of community and tribe. Watch out for the signs. How are we as a movement going to secure this legacy? I'll tell you what we're going to do as leaders of this company. We will continue to build farms. We will continue connecting people to nature. We will continue putting people over profit. And we will continue to never compromise in terms of quality. It was a sacred honor for me to be in the room with Gary in his last moments. I committed to him as I said goodbye that I would never, ever deviate from the path that he has set us on. I would ensure his values and love were magnified even more. And Mary, I promise you here today that we will never deviate. And Gary will live within us as we expand on that work. I'd like to end with a quote from Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, that I believe perfectly summarizes our friend and mentor, Gary. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you cannot do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who actually do. Thank you, everyone. May the powerful spirit of Gary abide in all of us from today moving forward. Thank you.
I'd like to dedicate this song to my father. I believe that the song perfectly summarized his life. To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest. And the world will be better for this. Not one man scorned and covered with scars still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable stars. And the world will be better for this. Not one man scorned and covered with scars still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable stars.
Thank you, Jacob. That is a very fitting song indeed for Gary. We'll now have a chance to hear from Kelly Case. She's our Chief of Staff at Young Living and a close personal friend of the Youngs for many years. Next, we'll hear from John Wetton. He's the Director of Special Projects, which actually means he's been on a lot of adventures with Gary. Next, you'll hear from Tamara Packer, who is not only Gary's cousin, but our resident expert on the raindrop, and in a very real way is carrying on Gary's legacy in that way as a trainer for us at Young Living. Next, we'll hear from Mark Harris, a man of many talents pilot, also our Vice President of Corporate Farms at Young Living, and a close personal friend of Gary's. And then we will hear from Sabina DeVita, a crown diamond with us at Young Living and a longtime friend of the Youngs. So I'll turn the time over now to Kelly Case.
Ooh. My earliest memory of Gary happened over 17 years ago. I had been an employee of Young Living for just a few months when I was invited to go snowmobiling and sledding in the mountains. We were a small operation then, and I'm fairly certain that all employees, from marketing to R&D, the call center to the warehouse, were invited on this snowy adventure. I was standing at the base of an awesome sledding hill because, of course, Gary found the biggest hill in the mountain that he could. I had my inner tube in one hand, and I was debating how to get to the top of that hill when Gary pulled alongside me and playfully offered me a ride to the top of the hill on his snowmobile. Keep in mind, I was a brand new employee and I didn't know any better. I hadn't yet learned that you never get on the back of a snowmobile of Gary Young. I naively climbed on the back of that machine, and with one arm holding tight to the inner tube and the other holding tight to Gary's sled, he took off at full speed. I was fairly certain I was going to meet my end on the back of the snowmobile that day. Thankfully, I didn't fall off of the back of Gary's sled, and I made it to the top of the hill, eventually, after a very fast and very scary ride. You'll probably hear this many times today, but Gary lived by the motto, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. If you've ever wondered what it's like to work closely with Gary, I think those of us who've been blessed with that opportunity would agree that working with him was a bit like that snowmobile ride. You're always moving fast. It's often a little scary, but in the end, the rewards are worth the ride. 13 years ago, I made the difficult decision to quit my job at Young Living so that I could be a full-time stay-at-home mom to my 2 young children. After being home for almost 8 months, my phone rang one day out of the blue. I looked at the display. Gary Young was flashing up at me. I immediately thought, I am not answering that call. He's gonna come and he'll ask me to come back to work, and I won't do it. I refuse. But that thought only lasted a second, because who was I kidding? You never ignore a call when it comes from Gary Young. Sure enough, I'm standing here today because of that phone call. There would be thousands of calls from Gary over the next 12 years that I would answer. People always tease me because I carry 2 cell phones. I have my personal phone, and I have my Gary phone. I like to think of my Gary phone as his lifeline. I would answer his call day or night, weekday or weekend. In fact, I prided myself on being available to Gary 24/7. For years, while Gary traveled, particularly when he traveled studying the Frankincense Trail, he was often putting himself in harm's way, living that life right on the edge. He was in Somalia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Oman, among many other places. I worried, Mary worried, we all worried. But Gary had a mission, and he never failed to answer the call of that mission. So I would sleep with my Gary phone under my pillow when he was traveling. I figured if it was under my pillow, it would be muffled enough that it wouldn't wake up my sleeping husband, but that I would be able to hear it and take his call. And he did call many times. Some often wondered, why are you willing to do what you do? Why would you sleep with your phone under your pillow and be available 24/7? To me, the answer was always so simple. How could I not? Because Gary was traveling all over the world, he gave me the greatest gift, and he encouraged me to stay at home and be a mom first. I believed also with all of my heart in Gary and what he was doing in the mission of Young Living. The least I could do was answer a phone call. Wednesday night this last week, I got home after a long day. I was feeling completely spent, emotionally and physically. I had not yet had a quiet moment to even begin thinking about what I was going to say to you all today. As I went to bed, I said to Gary, how am I supposed to stand up in front of all those people and say goodbye? How do I share the love I have in my heart for you without completely falling apart? I went to sleep with a heavy heart and feeling stressed about how to find the words for this moment. At 5:29 a.m. on Thursday morning, I sat straight up out of bed. I reached for my phone and I started typing frantically as the words and memories flooded my mind. I believe Gary had called, and I answered. Gary, I promise you that I will continue to listen, and when you call, I will answer, always.
First impressions are everything. The first time I ever saw Gary was about 10 years ago. I had just been hired on, and the 2008 convention was a few days away. Gary and a small group of people were standing in the parking lot, unpacking a new CO2 cannon. that was fashioned in the shape of a Ningxia Red bottle that was designed to shoot t-shirts into the crowd at convention. He loaded the cannon with a t-shirt and said, "Let's turn it up all the way and see what happens." The t-shirt shot out with so much force that it broke a window of a car in the next parking lot over. Gary said, "Wow, it's a good thing we tested this thing out before using it on stage." He then turned to someone standing next to him and said, "Have legal write up a letter to let the owner of the car know that we will pay for the window." I knew then that Gary was someone that would be fun to get to know better. Mary asked me to share a story today to illustrate what it was like to work and travel with Gary. As I thought of what story to share, I thought of the tens and possibly hundreds of other people in attendance today who have also traveled with or worked closely with Gary and who love him dearly. And all of us have stories. And so I wanted to tell a story that all of you could relate to. A story with a common theme that would be universal to all of us. So here it goes. A few years ago, I was feeling burned out, as maybe some of you have also felt before. Of course, I felt lucky to be a part of Gary's adventures, but the nonstop travel was exhausting. It's not that I didn't want to travel with Gary, but 5 years of more than 200 days a year on the road was starting to take its toll. So I came up with a plan, which was to find someone with whom I could divide the travel work in half. All I had to do was get Gary to agree to the plan. I was nervous about bringing this up with him. After all, I didn't exactly want to admit that a man twice my age was running me into the ground. So I decided to couch my proposal not as being burned out, but instead as a desire to have more work-life balance. More time for a social life, maybe even find a girlfriend. So, on a car ride between Petra, Jordan, and the Israeli border, I shared my plan with Gary and started to lay out my justifications. He saw right through me because he interrupted me and said, "John, don't worry about it. You're not the first person I've burned out." The good news was that he gave me the go-ahead to have HR post a duplicate of my position and begin the search for someone with the right qualifications. A few days later, when I got back to the office, I sat down, read through a few recent postings to try to figure out what a job description was supposed to look like, and came up with this. Job summary: traveling assistant to the founder. Primary duties and responsibilities: travel with the founder and handle any technical issue that might come up with any electronic equipment, which includes, but is not limited to, smartphones, computers, cameras, projectors, or other AV equipment. Help build and edit keynote presentations for meetings and trainings that the founder presents at. Shoot photos and video to document the founder's travels, discoveries, and general working conditions, and prepare these photos and videos for internal distribution. At times, assist in purchasing farm equipment or supplies related to the operation of farms and distilleries. Drive large trucks and operate earth-moving equipment and farm implements, and assist in harvesting and distillation. Qualifications: must be a certified Mac genius. Must have a background in graphic design and video editing and knowledge of Photoshop, Illustrator, Keynote, Final Cut Pro, or Premiere. Must have at least a basic competency in any 3D drafting or 3D design software. Must be a competent photographer and videographer and demonstrate a thorough understanding of photographic techniques and terminology. Must be a native English speaker or possess native fluency in English and be a confident writer and editor. Foreign languages, particularly Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, while not required, would be extremely beneficial. Must have a valid driver's license with an excellent driving record. Must be able to drive a manual transmission. Must be familiar with auto mechanic tools and construction tools and practices. Must be able to work long hours outside in extreme temperatures and be able to carry heavy loads long distances over uneven terrain. Must not be afraid of heights, claustrophobic, or have any reservations about flying in small aircraft. Must be able to travel at a moment's notice and be away in foreign countries for long periods of time, often working extended overtime for several weeks continuously without days off. Must possess a U.S. passport, prior foreign travel experience required. Must be able to handle a very stressful working environment, often dealing with extremely short and unreasonable deadlines. Education. This employee must be able to learn new skills almost immediately under extreme stress. College education not required. I emailed this job description to HR multiple times, requesting that the job position be posted, but it never was. I'm not quite sure why. I know there are a few people here today who feel that by swapping out just a few words, this could perfectly describe what they did for Gary. There are many, many more of you whose job description reads quite differently, but contains an equally long and fun and entertaining list of seemingly random and unrelated things that Gary has tasked you with over the years. And in many cases, these things have required immense growth and learning. As I look back at the job description, I now realize that the person we were looking for wouldn't necessarily come with a specific set of skills, but rather we were looking for a person with a very specific attitude. Gary built a great company because he found people with can-do attitudes and then gave those people immense opportunities to learn and grow, often tasking them with accomplishing things for which they had little qualification. As people grew, Young Living grew. And it was this growth that made Young Living a living company. Opportunities for growth and learning. These are the common threads of the narrative that unite all of us. This is our story. Gary was full of one-liners, as Kelly has already shared one, and I hope many more people share one today. I've spent a lot of time this week trying to think of a one-liner that I could share that would sum up Gary's ethos or the way he looked at the world. But I've come up empty-handed. But then I was thinking about how sometimes it's the things we don't say or won't say that define us more than the things that we do say. And if you were to ask me, what is something that Gary Young never said, it would have to be, "That's not my job." He was a man who labored endlessly in every aspect of the pursuit of his vision and dream to bring essential oils and wellness to the world, a goal that he clearly achieved. All of you who have been lucky enough to work side by side with Gary and been willing to adopt his attitude will clearly know and understand how your lives have been blessed by your association with him. I think the greatest compliment that Gary ever paid me was when he said, "John, you're a good man to ride the river with." And I know that I'm not the only person who he expressed this to. And so for all of the men and women here today who have labored beside Gary, I would like to say, Gary, thank you for the adventures. Thank you for the opportunities to grow and to learn, and thank you for the memories. But most of all, Gary, thank you for your friendship and allowing us to ride the river with you.
I'd like to thank Murray for the opportunity and honor of sharing through a few thoughts about my dear cousin, mentor, and particularly my dear friend. I think each one of us could call Gary our dear friend. You know, he made everybody feel so important, and like you were his only and best friend. You know, the song comes to my mind of "You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings," and many of us, I think that, you know, Gary was truly our hero, for he was indeed that. Gary Young carried the knowledge within his heart that his purpose was to help people and prevent and help people with suffering. This started for Gary at a very early age. I'm sure many of us have heard Gary tell the story of his mother and how he helped her. She had arthritis, and he would rub her hands to relieve some of the pain that she was having. He shared that story many times and said from that moment in time that he knew that his mission was to help people, and that is exactly what he did in his life. I saw him do that one time to a 99-year-old woman in Vilcabamba, Ecuador. We were traveling through the country looking for Palo Santo, and we went to Vilcabamba. He had been there previously because the people had longevity there, and he wanted to see if indeed they were still experiencing longevity. And there was a 99-year-old woman sitting on this street, and her hands were all crippled up, and he went to that woman, took a oil out of his pocket and rubbed her hands just as he did his mother's hands. I had the opportunity to work with Gary for over 6 years at the Nova Vita Wellness Center. There I had the privilege of learning many things from Gary, whether it was a therapy, raindrop therapy, neurauricular, the microscope work. I learned a lot about the human body, mind, and the spirit and soul from Gary. I also learned about compassion from Gary while I worked with him. One time we were in a small village on the surgery truck where Gary was able to go many times and assist with surgery. You know, it was amazing with Gary that he could do anything for the first time, and it looked like he'd done it 1,000 times, and that's what he did in the surgery truck. While we were there, the doctors were allowing Gary to do some research, and he had formulated a pain formula for part of the patients that were having surgery. This surgery was done in a back of a container, a truck that they turned into a surgery truck. And we would give half of the patients just regular oil, like the V6 vegetable complex oil that we have. The other half of the patients, we would give Gary's special pain formula that he made with the essential oils. And then we would look at the blood and see the difference. At this time, however, one little girl, I think she was about 6 years old, got the V6 rather than the pain formula, and we could hear her sobbing in the other room after the surgery, and Gary finally just said, "I don't care about the research, we have to help the little girl." And so he went in and assisted this little girl. You know, Gary loved the old and the young. We had, in Ecuador, we had people from the villages come to the wellness center. I remember one little old man, particularly from Chongong, and he had no money. And so he came once a week, and Gary would take payment with mangoes, was his payment for his treatment there. All of us here probably know about the wonderful school that Young Living Foundation has built, and Gary started. Before that school was started, the school on the corner was just a horrible place for the children to go to school. It had no windows, one big room, and an outhouse. That first year we were there around Christmas time, Gary had the bright idea that he was going to dress up as Santa Claus, and that's exactly what he did. He put a Santa Claus suit on, we wrapped presents for those little children, and we went and he gave all the children in the Shangang village before the school was ever built the best Christmas probably they'd ever had. You know, with Gary, traveling through Ecuador is really interesting. You've heard the phrase of stop and smell the flowers. Well, with Gary, it was stop and smell anything, everything, any plant. It was great fun. We'd be driving, and all of a sudden he'd stop the car, and we'd wonder what was the matter, and he'd jump out of the car and go to the side of the road there and start smelling the plants and see if there are any aromatic plants there. And indeed there were. That's where the Dorado Azul came from, a weed in the borrow pit. Also, that's where he found the trees, the eucalyptus blue in Ecuador. So it was an always adventure with Gary. I think we could say they were all better people. Well, I know we can say they were all better people because of Gary Young. He pushed us beyond our limits. In fact, I remember the first time in Ecuador when he asked me to teach Raindrop to the distributors that had come to attend to learn Raindrop. I was not prepared. I didn't know I was going to do it. And he said, okay, it's your turn. And I remember that he just held his hand right in the small of my back so I wouldn't be frightened while I taught. And I can think each of us can imagine Gary was supporting us that way now, with his hand in the small of our back, feeling his energy there and his love. Gary demonstrated how one person can make a difference through vision, belief, faith, and manifestation. I watched Gary's faith time after time. One time I was with Gary and Mary and the boys and his dear friend El Nettle, and we went to his favorite place in the entire world, Warm Springs. This was a difficult 3-hour horse ride, particularly for Mary and I, who didn't love the horse ride, but Gary didn't have much allowance for fear, and so on those horses we got. This particular year, as we rode in, we put up all the tents. It was finishing our dinner that evening around the campfire and looked up at the sky, and the mountain was on fire. The whole mountain was ablaze. It was just unbelievable, and it was coming right toward our camp. And so Gary asked us right then, and we all knelt down, and he said a prayer, that we'd be safe and protected, and I knew that he had faith that we would be protected. He had to go up on the mountain with Eldon to gather the horses, and Mary and I stayed at camp with the boys, and the boys were praying, and Mary and I were gathering up the tents, and as it dawned, Mary and I and the rest of the family got on our horses, and it was so interesting because as the night went on, the fire was all around us, but it wasn't coming toward us, and then all of a sudden the fire was stopped completely, and I knew it was through Gary's faith and his deep belief in God that fire stopped. We got on the horses and rode out that day, and as we got up on the hill and turned around, the mountain was again ablaze, and it burned several acres after that. And so we were protected because of our faith and Gary's faith. Gary's teachings throughout the years were not just about the prosperity, but on how to be free from negative beliefs and anchored emotions. He often shared very transparently his own lifetime struggles as he taught us how to use essential oils and assist us with freeing ourselves from these negative beliefs so that we could be leaders and change the world. He taught passionately from his soul. Yes, it seems that we had to let go of his physical presence much too early than we would like. However, he has left us with a great legacy. Let us take what Gary has taught us so passionately. Let your heart lead the way. If you are struggling, then take out one of these oils that Gary has taught us about. Gary taught and demonstrated how to manifest prosperity so that, and many of you have benefited from his teachings. In the last few months, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with Gary, and over many conversations, I think if he were here, he might say that we can do much good in the world with our prosperity. However, more importantly, he would have you look to the state of your heart and spirit. He would want you to have balance. Prosperity will not bring the contentment you seek until your heart is right with God. That's what I think Gary would want us to know. Let Gary's legacy empower us to be balanced leaders who continue to ease the suffering for ourselves first and then for the world. As we do this, his legacy will live on for generations and generations as he has given his life to us to carry this on. Now, let us all say goodbye to our dear friend and mentor. We love you, Gary.
I would like to take the time to sincerely thank all the people who have come here to celebrate an amazing and inspirational life of Gary Young. My name is Mark Harris, which some of you who have been to the farm events might already know. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I've had the pleasure of working with Gary side by side for the last 4.5 years. If he was at one of the farms, I was usually within arm's length of him. My journey with Gary Young and Young Living started out a little strange, which is not unusual for Young Living. 5 years ago, while living in Florida, I was contacted by an aircraft broker to do a pre-purchase inspection on an airplane. I was told the airplane was well maintained and excellent condition, which was true, since when I got to Atlanta, I saw the airplane and I realized, what a coincidence, I've been taking care of this same airplane for 15 years. During the pre-purchase inspection, I was asked if I could fly the plane to Idaho and pick up the buyer, whose name was Gary Young. I agreed, and the next thing I knew, I'm standing at the airport in Sandpoint, Idaho. But the strange part of this trip was the broker could not get a hold of Gary. Usually the buyer is waiting at the airport for his brand new airplane. It turned out we couldn't reach Gary since he was busy out in the woods harvesting trees. I learned this is typical Gary. He'd always rather be farming and getting his hands dirty than being a businessman in a suit. I finally met Gary for the first time, and he seemed like a good-natured man, but he had this overwhelming smell of Christmas tree on him. Little did I know how much this man was going to change my life. As we all know, that's what Gary did. He changed people's lives. Without my knowledge, the aircraft broker had explained to Gary that I was probably one of the most knowledgeable people when it came to fixing and inspecting this new airplane. So from time to time, I would fly the airplane, do repairs, and schedule maintenance that was required. As time went by, Gary kept asking me if I wanted a full-time position, but I refused because I lived in Florida with my family. That was until June 4th, 2014. That was the night we landed in Fort Nelson, and I realized there just might be something to this essential oil thing. So from that point on, I remained by Gary's side, starting with the construction of Fort Nelson Northern Lights Distillery, through so many incredible experiences and adventures, and until his passing. For those of you who have not visited Fort Nelson, it is an amazing place, with aurora borealis at night and a rapidly changing season with the extreme Canadian winters. I remember the mayor of Fort Nelson coming out to our construction site, talking with Gary, and it was probably about the second week of October. He was wondering when we were going to halt construction because, as the mayor exclaimed, winter's upon us. At this time, we were still just wearing hoodies, and Gary replied to the mayor, "We will stop when we are finished and distilling and producing black spruce essential oil." I know the mayor did not believe Gary, but anybody who knows Gary's determination, energy, work ethic would have known this man does not let anything stand in his way or stop him. not even Mother Nature. We pushed on, only stopping on days when the temperature literally got 20 degrees below zero. That was a major lesson that I learned when working with Gary. He set expectations high, almost unobtainable, but he would endure, push each of us to our limits we didn't even know that was within us, to make a dream a reality. I remember he told me with a wink, "Mark, the difficult is not a problem. The impossible just takes a little longer." I love working with Gary. One of my favorite memories, we had just completed purchasing the Fort Nelson property. Gary had rented a Trek excavator, and he put me in it, and he said, "Have you ever run an excavator?" My reply, "Does that include today?" I remember him laughing and finally said, "Yes, it does." He gave me about 30 seconds of instruction and set me off to dig. Knowing how Gary operates, that was the complete introduction and lesson on all the heavy equipment that I was tasked to run while building that farm. He had confidence in me, which gave me confidence in myself. This is how Gary affected people and made them feel like they could do anything. As I look back on the days of building the Fort Nelson distillery, the long summer hours and the short cold winter days, it was such an incredible and rewarding experience for me working side by side with Gary and getting really to know him, learning about the essential oil world, listening to his stories about his adventures, mostly Gary's outlook on life, the importance of God, the love of family, the hard work, setting goals, striving to not just achieve them, but to crush them and set them again, and always giving back. I would not have traded those days for my tropical living at my Florida house. And as was said here before, Gary's favorite saying, "If you're not living on the edge, doing the most you can, you're taking up too much room." The fondness I have for Gary was dutifully earned. I recall a Melissa harvest in St. Mary's. We were going to start early, so I set my alarm for 4:30. I was going to be the first one up when in the fields. I was very careful not to wake Jacob, Joseph, Mary, or Gary. But to my surprise, when I got out of the house, Gary was already in the fields, checking the Melissa to see if it was ready for harvest. And I remember telling my friends, Gary wakes the sun up, puts it to bed, only when he's finished for that day. I think what Gary liked about me and drew us closer was my willingness to do anything, no matter how crazy the idea. Which leads me to the next adventure that happened during the same Melissa harvest. Because Gary was so innovative, there were so many times he would engineer custom equipment due to the uniqueness of our harvests. During one of the many trial and error periods of the Melissa harvest, the swather had failed to collect the Melissa. So in an attempt to manually collect the cut plants, we welded a folding chair behind the rotating head of the pickup and cutting blades of the swather. At this point, I want to assure my OSHA safety coordinator that this might not have been very safe, but I did use my belt for my pants to hold me onto the chair to prevent me from falling into the blades of the swather. And I believe that there's no photo evidence left. Just recently at the Last Men's Camp, the Face Your Fear Challenge was a hike in the dark through the Uinta Forest. Myself and Skylar had just finished programming the personal GPSs for each person, just in case they got lost in the dark while trying to navigate back to base. The location we were going to meet the men's group was in the forest at a place called Soapstone Pass. When we arrived, there was no sign of Gary or a group of men. But Skylar and I finally frantically started searching and asking anybody we passed on the logging road if they saw a group of 75 men. But to no avail, the whole group had disappeared. Mind you, Skylar and I were the only two with GPSs at this time. So at this point, we were going to leave the woods so we can get into cell phone range and call back to the lodge to see if anybody from the group had called to change the location. Just as we were ready to head out on the main trail, Skylar and myself both spotted what appeared to be a 60-foot campfire Without hesitation, we both looked at each other and said, "That has to be Gary." This is a typical in everything Gary did. He was always 100%, 10%, no matter what the task, no matter what the cause. Gary was always bigger than life. The best tribute I can give to my friend is, God looked down on his newly created world and thought, I need someone I can trust to take care of the lands and the fields. I need someone strong enough to till the soil, to plant the seeds, and to tend the crops. I need someone who's devoted enough to work 18-hour days. I need someone who will rise at dawn, tend the horses, mend the fences, and do the chores. I need someone who will work the fields all day, fix the equipment until dark, then stays up half the night feeding a newborn elk calf. I need someone who is strong-hearted with family values and sharing, caring, and discipline. I need someone who has patience and also someone who has perseverance to go the extra mile. I need someone who is willing, kind enough to extend a helping hand to a neighbor. I need someone who is thankful for the rain, also for the sun, who has faith that the harvest is worth the effort. Someone who graces you with blue smiling eyes, feels so proud when his children say they want to spend their life doing what their dad does. So God created a farmer in the image of Gary Young. Gary, in heaven, you will travel. Anywhere you will travel in heaven, you will be a hail fellow well met. My only regret to you is that you did not have 2 lifetimes in which to guide me, teach me half of what you know. Goodbye, my mentor, my friend, my brother. I will truly miss you.
Well, this is such a great honor and a privilege for me to be asked to do this. I was asked to share a few memories, some memoirs of my journeys with Gary. And I also like to share with you that I was told it yesterday at 6 o'clock. And I sort of sat back in myself and I said, well, you know, that's how Gary would do things. This was one of his traits. He liked to challenge people. He liked to challenge all of us, and I'm sure some of you also experienced that with Gary. As I did look back, I thought, wow, destiny. I look at myself here. I look at Mary, Gary, the family. Destiny, a magician of time. I was introduced to Young Living back in 1997. I became a member, didn't know very much, but read the material. I was given and sent 1 brochure and 1 handwritten letter. The brochure was written in such a way that as I read it, I said to myself, I want to meet this man, Gary Young. I approached my husband and I said, I am going to meet this man. And he said, why do you want to do that? I said, because I feel it already that this man has been touched by the hands of God in a very unique and different way. And I just felt that so strongly. So I had the opportunity later in 1997 and hosting a radio show. And I thought about it, and I did it. I said, I'm just going to call his office, and I'm going to ask if Gary Young will be on my radio show. He did. He was gracious about it. He had to arise at 4 in the morning because it was a 7 o'clock morning show. And it was during that talk that I had another just awesome feeling about who this man was. And it was at that point, during our commercial break, I said, Gary, do you know anything about Toronto? He says, oh, you're in Toronto. I don't know very much about that area. I said, well, we have a special show and I would love for you to come up to it. The next commercial break, he said, I'll be up there. And it was during that time, between then and 1998, in March, that was the first time I actually met Gary and Mary. He did take that leap to coming up to Toronto to our health show for the very first time. And it was during that talk that I saw another, oh my goodness, it was such a quality of Gary's where when he's challenged, you don't do that. Because Gary will make sure that he meets that challenge. And it was during that show that Gary was challenged about Dr. Daniel Penowell. And Gary made a promise that to all of us that he was going to make sure that Daniel Penowell would be at the next convention. And he was. I was in awe. So many times, so many stories. When Gary was challenged with any untruths, he set out to prove it otherwise. In 1999, he called me up and he said, Sabina, I think I'd like to do a raindrop event up in Toronto. I said, but Gary, I don't know very much about raindrop. He says, that's okay. You'll learn it. Because Gary was that way. He knew that no matter what, you could learn it, you could do it. So we did, and we had 800 people attend that, our first ever and only ever Canadian raindrop event with Gary Young. He had a knack for challenging many others. In 2001, he also called me up and said, I'd like you there for the emotional clearing training we're going to do. I said, well, Gary, it's my first time event. It's okay. He knew that I was in the area of emotions and psychology, and so we were there. The fire walk in Mexico. Oh my goodness, there's just so many stories there. And that was a very hot experience. Some people just didn't make it quite across that path. But Gary, he made sure that everyone was urged and was inspired because that was his nature. He wanted all of us to be able to walk across those hot coals because he believed in us. There's just so many more memories. I was also asking the same question this morning, similar to Kelly. Gary, what else would you like me to say? And so there were two words that came up. One was I totally recognized Gary's IQ. He didn't have to have a college degree. He already had a knack, an intelligence that was there, that was just above any college degree. But Gary also had another. He had a GQ. I call it the God quotient and the genius quotient. God and genius were his. He also possessed that, and he certainly showed it many, many times on many of the trips and travels that I had experienced. One example that came to mind also this morning was our Ecuador trip. I had the opportunity to become a diplomat of International Parliament for Safety and Peace. I knew that it was important for Gary to also become a diplomat, and so I initiated that process. I didn't realize that it also became part of a major part of his own destiny in what took place in Ecuador. It made the process for Gary as a diplomat to attend, to acquire, to purchase many different goods as a diplomat. But what was most inspiring for me was our trek one day as we met the Ecuadorian diplomat going out. Again, it was similar to what Tamara was sharing with you, our trip down to the farm. And we stopped by that little school in Chungkong. Gary said, stop the van. He jumped out, and of course we followed him. He walked around the premises, and he looked at that, if you can call it a building, but it was so deplorable. We walked around, and Gary walked, and he stopped, and he said, no, this has to change. We can change it. Young Living can change this. We walked back to the van, took some pictures, and then he said, I have a plan. And that was the beginnings of the Young Living Foundation and the Academy. And we obviously know how successful that has become. I've never met a man in my entire life as a man who just held at that time, I would say still holds, all of the attributes of leadership, of dedication, of love. I have one more story. There's so many, but there was one that came to me that I thought was very unusual. Gary had a deep desire to commune with people, but also with nature, and with the animals, and with anything around him. And so he told a small group of us about the groundhog story. He says, one day, this was in St. Mary's, he says there were so many groundhogs out on the field, and we just can't grow. We couldn't grow our lavender and our melissa. It was just too many holes. So, he says, I thought of a plan. He says, that next morning, early morning, I went out to pray, but more to talk to the groundhogs. We thought, I'm going to commune with their spirit. And he did. The next day, Gary had a knock on the door from a nearby farmer, and he said, Gary, do you have any idea of what happened? He says, I've got all these groundhogs in my forest. They just moved over. We thought, oh, wow, Gary, you just have such a way. But I'd like to just share a little quote from Rumi, a 13th century poet who said, goodbyes are only for those who love with their eyes, because for those who love with heart and soul, there is no such thing as separation. Gary is with us more than ever in spirit. I believe Gary accomplished his final earthly vision. There was another experience I had with Gary, and that was the Peace Caravan. He had a dream. He really, truly desired to have people of all faiths, of all religion, of all creeds, of all nationalities come together in spirit. I believe he has achieved this. Just look around. Just look around, look at the world, and look what has happened. People from all races, all creeds, all nationalities here together. I also believe that Gary lived the life without any boundaries. He kept pushing the limits. He has now become boundless in the realms of oneness and allness with the infinite. our dear friend and brother, is free. It's interesting that this year is the year of our convention called Freedom. And if I may, I'd like to conclude with another little expression and a little prayer. Gary was an effervescent spring of creation. It didn't matter what moment or where he was, he would always be creating another idea. Another poet once said this about death: in the depth, Khalil Gibran, in the depth of your hopes and desires lies your silent knowledge of the beyond. And like seeds dreaming beneath the snow, your heart dreams of spring. Trust the dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity. My dear Gary, I thank you for this moment. I thank you for all that you have given humanity, and that this will live on forever. Your legacy, your living legacy, is still living. For we are the ambassadors that will continue to carry your light. The world loves you, Gary. I love you. And God bless all of us.
Thank you, Sabina. Gary was indeed a dreamer. I absolutely love that quote. You might be interested to know we now have reached nearly 100,000 of people around the world who are currently joining us via simulcast. Again, a pretty inspiring marker of the impact that Gary has had on so many of our lives. We'll next be favored with some thoughts from the Vice President of IT Operations and a constant and close friend of Gary and the Youngs, Joe Walker. Following Joe's comments, Jean-Noel Landel, who's joining us all the way from France, will share a few thoughts about Gary as well. Jean-Noel is responsible, or he and Gary were responsible for helping us get lavender and sponsoring the largest lavender partnership in the world. Next, we'll hear from Lauren Walker. She is the Chief Sourcing Officer and has taken on the very heavy mantle of making sure that we continue to scour the globe and to have the adventures that Gary always had to provide the essential oils to the people who need them. And then we'll hear from Ben Howden, who is a Royal Crown Diamond with us and also a partner with Gary in building out the beautiful Northern Lights farm. Joe Walker.
Hello, Young Living family. How are we today? The weather's been a little bit crazy, but I think Gary would be loving it. He loved being out anytime, any place, anywhere. Never stopped him. So today, I think it would set him free. I'm the Vice President of IT Operations here at Young Living, as Ben said. A lot of emotions today. A lot of stories, and not enough time to tell them all. Today we're here to celebrate Gary's life and to mourn his passing. He was a man who lived life to the extreme and fulfilled his lifelong dream of bringing back the ancient art of essential oils. And the world will continue to benefit from the gifts he's given us as a result. Wherever he went, people wanted to be there. He simply had an infectious nature about him. From the beginning, I noticed that both Gary and Mary were truly interested in interacting with their employees and distributors on a personal level. We still have that family feeling today. and it's one of our strengths as a business. It's why we have such loyal employees and distributors to this day. I'll never forget the first time I met Gary. I was called to his office to help him out with a computer issue 12 years ago. As I walked into his office, I waited for him to look up, and when he did, I said, "Hi, I'm Joe. Here to work on your computer issue." And he stood up, and he reached out with those strong hands, and he grabbed mine and he said, "Gary Young, cowboy, not a computer guy." I remember us both, we laughed, and I said, "Well, I'm your guy, okay?" And ever since, we've built a bond. He's had a lot of helpers in the last 12 years. John Wetton, after many years of me, Mark now, and many of you, Gary loved us. He loved all of us, and he wanted us to interact with him no matter where he was or what he was doing. Throughout the years, we've continued to strengthen our business and personal friendship. It's the reason why I've always called him the cowboy. And trust me, he deserves it. This and all of the farms and distilleries around the world is because he had that cowboy in his heart. And he really loves everyone. One thing that sets both Gary and Mary apart from anyone I've ever known is the personal sacrifices they've made for you and me. How many business owners do you know who would move their family to another country to build out a farming infrastructure for us? And they stayed there for years, living in what once was the jungle, but now transformed into the Ecuador farm. If only you knew how much personal time they have sacrificed for Young Living over the years to build up our worldwide seed to seal foundation, you would incredibly be grateful for their efforts. As a result of Gary's thirst for knowledge, adventure came with it while he scoured the planet in pursuit of it. Once I remember walking through a part of the untamed section of the jungle part of Ecuador farm with him when it was brand new. I remember asking him, "Should I have gotten a yellow fever shot?" And he said, "No, you'll be fine." I ended up covered in mosquito bites. Have you ever been bit by 1,000 mosquitoes at once before? I did. Later that night, I was a mess. Not Gary, though. And I was wondering in my mind, why is that? And then I remembered, before we went out, and I didn't do it, he told me to put on some essential oils that would repel the bugs. That never happened again. I learned my lesson, and I listen to Gary when he tells me something. Whether Gary was in the jousting arena, pulling his gun out in a gunfight here at Whispering Springs Old Town, preparing the earth for seed, or out making a deal with just a handshake, these talents served him well. I always thought he was born a few centuries too late. I remember one time Gary calling me and saying, "Let's go snowmobiling somewhere different this weekend." And I said, "That's great." And we started out from Strawberry Reservoir and ended up at Bear River Lodge in Wyoming. It was about 13 hours, 2 pit stops for fuel, and somewhere around 118 miles. When we finally pulled in and we were all wiped out, Gary seriously said, "Anyone up for a night ride?" Do you remember that, Rex? And all I remember thinking is, no way. And then we ate, and I know a few of us fell asleep in our clothes. We were so tired. Who knows where his energy for life came from? All I know is he pushed it to the limit, always. He would always say, when most people are starting to slow down, man, that's when you need to push it even harder. From a physical aspect, Gary could outwork anyone. We've heard that many times today. First up in the morning and last to bed, always working, teaching, studying, something to keep his mind busy and productive. Many of us interacted with him over the years, either in the office, at the farms, working the distilleries, preparing new land, or on one of his many adventures. He loved inviting people on his adventures, whether it be hunting, fishing, snowmobiling, riding horses, dog sledding, or just hiking in the mountains talking about the land and all its splendor. My dad used to say, you can be anything that you want to be in life. Only you hold yourself back. That was definitely the message Gary tried to teach everyone. He was successful in life because he demanded excellence. And he demanded out of himself more than he did other people. It was one of his biggest strengths. I truly believe people are drawn to that type of individual, and he definitely had the skills to teach people to believe in themselves so they could achieve anything they set their minds to. I know he has given that speech to many of us sitting here today. We all have a lot to be thankful for, and that's one of the traits that made him a great man. Great men are not born, they are made. And Gary made himself into what he is today. And it came with a lot of hard work, incredible pain and suffering, and the full support of all of the Young Living family. I know he would thank you all. In closing, I feel true sadness for Mary and the boys. We've spent many hours throughout the years together all over the planet. This has been a heartbreaking experience for the Young Living family and all of us. I've lost a good friend, our mentor, and one of the last cowboys I knew. Most importantly, Gary believed in me, you, our planet, and the natural wonders it can provide us all. I will truly miss him and all the amazing adventures we shared together. We've been left with his vision. We have the people and the best products Earth can provide. Let's keep his dream alive.
My name is Jean-Noël, and my accent is French. And it's been almost 3 years since I have not been speaking in English in front of a public. So I will make it much shorter than any other speaker did. So I've known Gary for 28 years. I was distilling at that time lavender in the south of France. I've been doing this for 30 years now. But I'm just retiring. 1 month ago, I retired. So the first time I met Gary was in October 1990, because I really wanted to sell essential oils that I was producing for health purposes and not for perfume industry. That was the tradition of our production in France. So I went to a health and natural product show in Los Angeles in October 1990 with some samples in my pocket. I went around the whole show for about 3 hours. And by the end of the morning, I only saw a little booth that said aromatherapy on it. And that's all it said on top of it. And that was the only place where essential oils were displayed. So I met a cowboy, dressed from the head to the feet as a cowboy. And I just handed him my samples. He opened the bottle, smelled it, and I have never seen somebody smiling so much by just smelling a bottle of lavender oil. He said, "Do you really distill this in France?" I said, "Yes." So I will be at your place in about 3-4 months. So went back home, said, "Well, I really spent a lot of money traveling all the way to France just to meet a cowboy saying that he will be home because he likes lavender." But he was home exactly 4 months ago. And that was the beginning of a long, long, passionate relationship. On Gary's first visit to France, he was so excited learning about our distillation techniques that he would every morning be the first one on site to start working, taking pictures and checking everything out. So some of the farmers were afraid he was only there to steal their know-how. When I shared this with Gary, he told me to tell them that the only concern they should have was to be able to produce enough quality lavender oil for him in the future. Remember, at that time, there was no aromatherapy at all. All our production was going to the perfume industry. So my farmers kind of laughed at him. But that's exactly what happened. From then on, I knew I could always trust Gary, and he always kept his word. He proved this to me on many other occasions. Like one time, when he was in a very bad position financially, and in order to pay me for the oils I had supplied him, he sold part of his land that he just purchased in St. Mary. This is something that is very hard for a farmer to do, believe me. So he really was one of the most honorable people I have ever known. The early days with Gary were very exciting. He had great energy and an enormous thirst for learning all he could from the Frenchmen who had been growing and distilling lavender for almost 100 years. But he also loved sharing his ideas and discoveries on the cultivation of aromatic plants and on the distillation of essential oils. This led to long evenings of discussions and sharing ideas. One thing about Gary is that he never kept his innovations for himself. He always wanted everyone to benefit from them. The day Gary inaugurated a distillery here in Mona, which implemented his new ideas of distillation, my partner Marcel Espieux, that Gary considered a master distiller and his mentor, declared that the pupil had exceeded the master. And that's absolutely what happened within 2 years after Gary started learning about distillation. This recognition of Gary's knowledge and innovation in the world of distillation led to him being accepted into the tight circle of French distillers and to him being the first American to own a lavender farm in France. We purchased the farm in 2002. A true friendship developed between Gary and the French growers and distillers, and Gary's devotion to have the best quality of lavender oil led to the salvation of true lavender from Provence. One of the growers that is here today declares that Gary saved his life because he was depressed from producing industrial lavandine oil and was thinking of selling his farm and quit. When Gary proposed to him that he grew a true lavender of excellent quality, this completely changed his life and his state of mind. I remember the last few times that Gary still came and visit in France, that because of this true bond that he had established with the growers in France, he often said when arriving, "It's good to be home." We all know that Gary was a very spiritual man, and this has always been a very important factor in my life as well. So Gary and I often had discussions on spirituality in general and on that aspect of essential oils in particular. When I first met him, essential oils were only used in aromatherapy for the medical, physical, healing side of them. But Gary taught me about the effect essential oils could have on our emotional being, on our psychological being, and on our spiritual being. And this was a true revelation for me, and a true revolution in the world of essential oils in France. Gary often spoke about his Father in heaven, and the fact that he was on a mission here on earth to help people alleviate their suffering. I noticed when I arrived 2 days ago here that one of the releases Young Living sent about Gary, he was called the father of the modern day essential oil movement, and this is really true. He had ideas that were far ahead of anyone else 28 years ago about essential oils and many other things as well. This capacity he had for seeing things and understanding things far ahead of other people was not always understood nor appreciated by others, and this caused him great suffering at the beginning. Now, today, I'm convinced that Gary is back in unity with his Father in heaven, full of peace and joy. He's at peace, but you know Gary, he's certainly not at rest. I feel that he's still sending help for us all from up above. Gary considered us all as his family, for whom he always had time, compassion, and love. And also he's physically far away, and it is painful for us. I can still feel him with me, and I have a strong feeling that he's saying that it is important to continue his life's work as a family by caring for one another. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lauren Walker, and I'm responsible for supply chain. October of 2016, I received an email from Kelly. This is 3 months within my tenure with Young Living. The email told me that Gary wanted to take me hunting. So me, Lauren, the girl from Brooklyn, who saw a deer for the first time in her late 20s when she hit it on the highway, was going hunting. I was overcome with complete fear. Had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I did know I was going to spend this time with Gary. So we went on this trip, and it wasn't me alone. It was actually a pretty large group of executives that had all gone together. And we expected this to be maybe 1-2 day max trip. We'd harvest our deer and head home. So that was the case for actually the other executives that had gone. After a day, they had their deer, they were back in their homes in their warm beds, and I was still on the mountain. I was there for 3 days, and we kept seeing deer, and Gary kept saying, no, that's not the one. And I was like, what are we doing here? It felt like, and so he said, just follow my lead. I was so nervous. He put his arm on my shoulder, actually, even before we got out there, and he said, do not worry. You follow everything I do, and I will teach you everything you need to know. You'll be just fine. So again, several days go by, no deer. It's freezing. I have no idea what I'm doing out there. And then on the third day, we get up and we're out in the mountain, high up. And then he says, okay, now is the time. You follow my lead. Do exactly what I say, and you're going to be just fine. He says, get down on your stomach. Get into an army crawl and crawl over about 50 yards over to that bush. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm probably the only person that's ever gone hunting with pantyhose under my camouflage, but that's all I knew. Gary didn't tell me what to wear, I just did it. So I crawled over to the bush with this heavy rifle on my arm, and he tells me, okay, quiet. You wait till he turns towards you and you go for it. And I did. First shot, 260 yards, flat on. It was great. However, the deer ran off. And we ended up chasing him for the entire day down the mountain. Well, while all of this is going on, 3 days, I got to spend quality time with Gary. And we didn't just talk about hunting. We talked about everything sourcing related. We talked about every farm. We talked about every partner farm. We talked about oils that were challenging to get and what our plan should be to go after them. He talked about regions to stay away from with regards to certain oils and regions that flourish. We planned out our first oil summit where we mapped out a plan for the next 10 years for Young Living for all of the oils that we need and where we're going to get them from. We talked about everything. And at the end of that third day, when I finally had my deer, and I was walking down the side of the mountain with sheer pride and joy, the biggest smile on my face, I didn't just have that deer. I had knowledge that I would never gather in a conference room. I would never gather reading a book or just out in the field. I learned it from the best. And I will never forget that. So Gary told me to follow him, follow his lead, and he'd teach me everything. And so now, Gary, I'm now ready to lead. I'm ready to take what you taught me on that mountain and what I lived for the last year and a half since then and move this company forward in the direction that you want, embracing your vision to reach your purpose and your goal. I truly honor that moment, and I will for the rest of my life. And I'm so proud to serve all of you, and I'm proud to serve Gary and his wishes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ben Howden, and today I ponder the life of my friend Gary Young. And I realize when I look back, I see so much more about him now than when I was with him. Gary had great principles. In fact, Gary had more principles than all the schools in America put together. The first time I was introduced to Gary, I was excited because I had seen my wife's life transform and was so happy she had found an answer to her health. Through the next few years, I had seen and heard some amazing stories about Gary. Then we got the privilege of going to the Mona farm here, and it was overwhelming for me as I saw the greenhouses full of new plants and the fields of lavender. We had a 5K run that year through the lavender fields, and Gary and I ran together. Next came the farm harvest, and we got the privilege to work in Idaho with our team. Gary depended on the distributors to help him on the farms. This is where I really got to know Gary. He led by example, and when you work hard, you earn your stripes, as Gary would say. And in 2007, we went to Ecuador, and I seen the amazing farm he had built and fields of plants to make oils for the world, and it was so inspiring. Then I realized when Gary had a direction from his father above where to find new oils, he always accomplished his plan. In 2008 in St. Mary's, Idaho, on the first week of harvest, we worked 20-hour days getting the distillery going and running, and Gary was trucking chips from 125 miles north from the Highland Flats farm. And Gary would come into the distillery at 5 in the morning and check on us and head out for more chips, thawing frozen breaks and on the chip trailers and chaining up to climb the hills into the farm and slippery roads. And all of that every day, there was always chips ready for us. Then every year we went to the Idaho harvest with distributors because along with us, we had the opportunity to spend time with Gary. Gary always told us a story after supper in the evenings, and we all looked forward to the journeys he took us on. After a week with Gary, we all left with a new vision, committed and changing in our goals. And Gary always brought Mary and the boys to conventions, and everyone shared his boys. They were part of Gary, and we shared them with all of us. And in 2014, on the France Diamond trip, Gary asked me, "Will you build us a farm in Fort Nelson for black spruce? We're out of valor and cannot get enough black spruce." He said, "You're Canadian and have a contractor's license in BC." And my first thought was, it's cold up there. And in the late 70s, we were there in minus 40 weather and snow and cold. So I asked him, "When do you want to build this farm?" He said, "We'll start this fall and work through the winter." Oh. As I digested some of this, some of the peers that were with us said, Ben, you will never keep up to Gary. If you do, it'll be the end of your feelings together with Gary, and you'll have hard feelings. And that was all part of my thoughts after doing this. On the last day of the trip, Gary come nose to nose with me, and he said, Ben, are you going to help me or not? I said, yes, Gary, I will. So we arrived home on Saturday night, and the next day I got a call from Gary. So when you come into Fort Nelson? I said, Gary, I just got home last night from France. He said, yeah, so did I. How about, can you come up tomorrow? Because I'm here in Fort Nelson. And pack your suitcase. And so I called our oldest son, Corey, and he was mining in Philippines. And I said, Corey, I need you to come home and help us build a farm for Young Living in Fort Nelson. He said, if it's for Young Living, I'll come and help you. So together with great friends and distributors and employees, we embarked on one of the toughest jobs I've ever done. Gary was there every day working for 4.5 months, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 days a week. Mary and the boys came up when they could and helped, and many distributors donated their time and efforts helping. There was a bigger purpose. It was to share oils with every home in the world. One morning after breakfast, Gary said, I've talked to 7 different countries this morning before breakfast. His drive was endless. Then the winter came, and it was very cold and bitter weather, and Gary's ears and fingers were freezing. And I said to Gary, why don't we just shut down till March, and when the weather gets better, we can finish this project. Gary looked at me, and tears rolled down his cheeks, and he said, Ben, you can go home, but I'm not going anywhere. You don't have 50 emails a day with distributors asking for valor, but I do. And that was a defining moment for me. I was committed. There was also a committed group like Mark Harris and John Wetton and Joe Walker and our son Corey and all that were there helping, among that Gary always was an amazing leader. Because of Gary's commitment, we now have Northern Lights Black Spruce Oil and have 27 blends with black spruce in it. All of us here have so many friends and relationships all over the world because of Gary. And now it's our privilege to carry the torch and continue to build relationships and share oils with every home in the world. In December of 17, we had the privilege of our last visit with Gary at the Royal Crown Diamond event. His last message to us was, this business is built on relationships. And there's lots of social media now, and it's all good. But Young Living is the world leader in essential oil because of relationships. So how do we keep the spirit of Gary alive in Young Living now? We work hard, we build relationships, we be committed, we lead by example, and we tell our story. Thank you, Gary, for all you've taught us and shown us. And yes, Gary, we will carry the torch for you.
Thank you, Ben Howden. We will conclude by hearing from Gary's wife and the CEO of Young Living, Mary Young. She'll offer some thoughts as well as a musical number, I Know My Redeemer Lives, one of Gary's favorites, after which Joseph Young will offer a tribute to his father and a closing prayer. Following Joseph's benediction, if I could ask the executives to come to the stage where we will plant a blue spruce, which will be find its final resting place in Tabiona on the Skyrider Ranch. Mary Young.
I asked if I could be mic'd because, like Gary, I don't like the confinement of the podium. It feels strange to me. I like to be able to walk around and move and look at the audience. I kept thinking what I might say. And it was so funny. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't write anything. And as you know, I'm so extemporaneous. And I've listened to all that's been said today. And I think we've had a magnificent view in a different way from each individual who has spoken. It was said to me, well, the program will be too long. And I said, but there are so many people who have come from so far that I want to make sure they go home feeling that it was worth their time to be here. When we first bought this farm, Gary and I would come down every day. This was before Jacob was born. And we'd work all day long. And at night, we'd sit out on the patio and just talk about feelings and what it was like. We had a bed in the visitor center, so we many nights stayed down here. And one evening, we were out on the patio, and he said, "It's so beautiful here. It's so peaceful. It's so quiet." And he started expounding on all the things that he was going to build here at the farm. You know, that vision of Gary's was in gear. And I said, "Gary, but we're so far away from everything. Who's going to come down here?" And he said, "You watch, Mary. You just watch them come." And as we have watched them come, and as we have walked across the lawns, here for convention, here for the Easter egg hunt, here for Christmas, it didn't matter what it was, the people were coming, and his heart was so full. He was so happy realizing that dream. The farm meant everything to him, and to have the people that he loved, his members, his distributors, come and be a part of that which he loved so much was the most rewarding thing I think I ever saw him express. And now at the end, the sun's shining and it's warm. I thought about the many people who we grow up learning about in our history classes. There was only one Galileo. There was only one Einstein. There was only one Michelangelo. There was only one Mozart. And there is only one Gary Young. No one will ever take his place. No one will ever walk in his shoes. And I wear only a 5.5. So I'm a long ways away from walking in his shoes. But all of us together will be able to keep his vision moving forward. I think all of us in our different ways loved him in different ways. We all had our own experiences with him. We all had different experiences with him, as you've heard. And yet together, the path is the same. I received a very interesting text message that I'd like to read to you. Gary was doing a special research project with a medical doctor at Iowa State University. And this doctor sent me a text. "Mary, I just saw in the news that Gary died. I am so sorry. Gary was a great man and had such vision. He taught me not to be afraid to take chances and not be afraid to fail. You and your family will be in my prayers." I keep thinking about Gary and how advanced and how ahead of his time he was, how great his ideas were, and all the things that he wanted to do that the rest of us are still thinking about. He was inspired and truly a genius. I miss him. As I said, his ideas were crazy enough to change the world, and they did. a medical doctor who didn't know Gary very well. We connected with him immediately. But we didn't spend much time with him. He didn't know what Gary was all about. But he saw the genius in Gary, and he was inspired to not be afraid to follow his dreams. I was having a conversation with a longtime friend a couple of nights ago, and the thought that came to my mind was, Gary's family was the world. Everywhere he went, he always looked for the good in other people. And I said to the friend to whom I was speaking, it's amazing all of the things that have happened to Gary. The people who tried to take advantage, the people who betrayed him, the people who stole from him. And this friend said, you know what was so amazing about Gary? No matter what happened, he never stopped trusting people. He never stopped seeing the good in people. He never stopped wanting to make it better. He never stopped looking for a solution. I hadn't thought of it that way, and it caused me to reflect on watching Gary in action, and it's true. He always looked forward, he never looked back. He never complained about what happened in the past. Only for a moment from that which he could learn and how he would do things better. But he was a forward-thinking man, and we all know his vision was bigger than anything I could imagine, and perhaps you could imagine. I've had it said to me, and I've heard through the grapevine, that many out there are saying, well, Gary had the oils. Why couldn't he heal himself? Why didn't he use the oils? What did he do? Why is Gary gone? The thought came to me, and this has helped me a little bit, and maybe it will help you a little bit. When Gary had that terrible accident when he was 24 years old, he had 19 broken bones, 3 open skull fractures, the brachial plexus broken in 3 places, and the spine herniated in 3 places. I would ask you this, who could live through that? Who? They left him out in the hallway outside of the emergency ward because they knew he was going to die. But he didn't die. What was it inside of him that kept him alive? We don't know that. But it's part of that fighting spirit that was within him. I believe that by the grace of God, we were given another 40 years to be with Gary Young. We were given the opportunity to be blessed with a knowing that he had, with the knowledge that he had. When we were married, I rubbed his legs down with oils every single night. He had so much pain. I would wake up in the middle of the night hearing him groaning. And I would say, Gary, what's the matter? He said, oh, my legs, my legs. And it would be 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and I'd go and I'd get the oils and I would massage and I would rub. And he would say, that helps. It helps a lot. Sometimes I was so tired I'd put my head down on the bed and I'd be massaging his legs. Many of the formulas that we have, he made for himself. Thyromin, Multigreen, Comfortone. Those were his early formulas, and Thyromin especially, he formulated for himself. He was always looking for things that would give him a little bit more strength. I probably was the only one who really knew how much he suffered. The last time that we had the big event up in Tabiona, and he wanted to have a big party for the community. And we were dancing in the barn. He had to have a barn dance. He just loved everything that had to do with the farm and the cowboys and the barn. And we were dancing. Many people said, "Oh, Mary, it was so fun to see you dancing." And while we're dancing, he said, "Mary, I can't move anymore. Mary, I've got to stop. It hurts too much. I can't move my legs." And nobody knew because he had a big grin on his face. He was confined to a wheelchair for life after that accident. And he suffered in a wheelchair for 27 months. What kind of pain did he go through trying to get out of that wheelchair? I don't think any of us can even fathom what he went through because we haven't gone through it. And he never complained. You never heard a word out of his mouth. This last ordeal that we went through, I cannot describe. And there were very few who came because we didn't want anyone to come. We didn't want anyone to see him suffering because we all loved him so much, and we saw this big, powerful man, and he was physically so powerful. He was mentally so powerful. And to see that power dissipate, he didn't want anybody to see that. We wanted you to remember him as you knew him, the powerful, powerful person that he was. He talked many, many times of dying. He was not afraid to die. He wanted to be with God. God was his friend. And many times he went to the mountains to be with God because that was God's living room. And when he needed answers to questions, he would go there and he would talk to God. And he would come back with the answers. That was his special moment. He loved the mountains so much. He loved the earth so much. He loved what God created so much. He was happy when his hands were in the dirt. He was happy when he was digging. He was happy on his hands and knees, planting with everyone else. He hated being in the office. He hated the cement. We had lots of fun when he came to the office. We had great meetings. We did lots of planning. But when I would say, "Well, you want to go to the meeting?" And he'd say, "Oh, do we have to?" I'd say, "Yeah, we should go." So we'd go. And we had a lot of fun being with so many who we absolutely loved being with. You know, it was a little bit, I remember when Jared came to work. We always knew when Jared was in the office because everybody was laughing in the halls. There was so much laughter, and it was just fun to be there. The day Gary went into the hospital, I started coughing. I had no cold. I had no runny nose. I had no sore throat. I just started coughing. And I've been told that's part of the grieving process. It's part of what happens to one who is so hurt, who feels so much pain. I have a very, very deep sadness within me. I have a void in my heart that will be there for as long as I live, till the day I die. But I will think about the 40 years that God granted us to have Gary live among us. What he has given the world is beyond my ability to express. All of you are here because of something that Gary did for you. Somehow he touched your life. And the thousands who are out there all over the world listening to this service are listening because Gary touched their lives. He truly was a man of the world. He truly loved the world as his family. And he was a man of God. He loved God. For him, the Bible was his owner's operator's manual. And many, many meetings, he would stand up on stage and chuckle and say, well, who's got their owner's operator's manual? And everybody would go, well, what are you talking about? And then he'd flip his Bible out and he'd say, who has a Bible? He always wanted to live by the Word of God. He always wanted to do what was right. He wasn't capable of manipulating, of lying, of tricking people, of saying, and he just wasn't capable of it. And he would get so mad, and he would swallow it. He would never spout off. He never used bad language, not ever. That was not part of who he was, because that wasn't what God would be proud of. There were so many times that we couldn't understand why things happened the way they happened. But he would still go forward. He would still plan. Sometimes we tried to get him to slow down, but he must have had a sense about his days that were numbered, because he wouldn't stop. No matter how tired, no matter how he hurt, no matter how sick he was, he had one more thing he had to do, and he had to do it as fast as he could. I said so many times, Gary, why can't you stay home? Why can't you rest? Why can't you heal? And he said, no, Mary, I can't wait. I've got to get it done. I've got to get to Tabiona. I've got to get here. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. Kelly and I have had 1,000 conversations about it. Why won't he stop? Because he had so much he had to do. You heard about what his need was. You heard what John went and said. Oh my goodness gracious, what an amazing insight John gave us into what Gary was all about. He gave us something that we can take with us, that we can carry forward to the world. There are people out there in need. There are people who are waiting for us to come with a message of something that's better, something that will help them. It was mentioned that freedom is our convention theme. What is this all about? What is life all about? What is helping other people all about? It's about freedom. Being free to live the way you want to live. Be it health, be it finances, whatever it is. Everyone wants to be free. And if you know of something that will help someone else, that might enlighten their minds and give them the freedom they are looking for, you will be held accountable if you don't give them that message. We are here to serve each other. We are here to serve God's children. We are his children, and we serve, help, and love each other, which was the example that Gary set. Gary loved music. He loved country western. But he loved music of God. When we were in Egypt, we had about 100 members with us. Some of you were there. We were in one of the pyramids. And he went to the guards and he said, "Would it be all right if my wife sang in the pyramid?" And I thought, "Oh, Gary, come on." But you know, when he wanted something, he went after it. And he wanted me to sing. He always wanted me to sing, "I know my Redeemer lives." He always wanted me to sing about God. And it was interesting in the hospital. He was almost comatose. And we were all still hanging on to a breath of hope, knowing he was getting ready to leave. And we started talking about what we were going to do this day. And I said, "Well, I'm going to sing My Redeemer Lives." And Gary opened his eyes and moved his head and looked at me and almost nodded. And we all went, "Oh!" And then he closed his eyes and went back into that state that he was in. I could not let him leave without doing this for him. I don't sing this for me. I sing this for him because this is what he wanted. I know my Redeemer lives. What hope and joy this gives. All glory to his blessed name. He is my Savior, still the same. He lives to wipe away my tears, to bless and comfort me through the years. My Savior is my heavenly friend, my wise and heavenly friend. To live and love him to the end, I know my Redeemer lives. Thank you all for being here, for sharing with us. We love you dearly, and we so appreciate the love that you have shared with us, for the thousands and thousands of prayers that we have felt, for the messages of love and concern and support. They will always live strong within our home and within all of our hearts. Where is it? I can't find it, Jordan. Thank you. wipe away my tears, to bless and comfort me through the years. He is my everlasting head, my Lord, my Lord, who once was dead. My Savior is my heavenly friend, wise and heavenly friend. He lives and loves me to the end, lives and loves me to the end. I know my Redeemer lives, my Redeemer lives. What hope, oh, what joy this gives, hope and joy this gives, to know He lives, my Savior lives, He lives, my Savior lives. Go, honey.
Good afternoon, Young Living members, friends, and family. Thank you all for coming in honor of my father. It means the world to me. My father was a great and caring man. I have some amazing experiences with him that would take more time to tell than we have today, but I'd like to share a few of them with you. My dad was a great storyteller, as many as you know. He told stories around the campfire in the mountains of Warm Springs, Idaho, that made us laugh till our faces was red and we were crying. He always wanted us to be with him in whatever he did and wherever he went. His latest adventure was dog sled racing in Alaskan wilderness. My mom, Jacob, and I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning so we could meet him at the end of the finish race. And when he saw us, he cried because he was so happy to see us. It was not always possible to be with him, but we did the best with juggling school and all of our activities. I eat, breathe, and sleep soccer, and my dad was at every game possible. And when he couldn't be there, he would ask my mom to record it, and then he wanted to hear every detail when I came home. My dad was always planning something fun for us, especially for our birthdays. He'd ask me how I wanted to celebrate it, and then he would go to work. He made every single birthday a memory I will never forget. Our family lived in Ecuador for several years until we went back to America, but I am always excited to return for a visit. We usually visit once or twice a year so I can be with my lifelong friends, Naili and Lisette, who I call my sisters. Dad loved the children as I do, and we love to be with our Ecuadorian friends. My dad's creativity at Christmas time was off the charts. He wanted Christmas to be unforgettable. One year, he bought a whole bunch of Christmas trees and set them up in the conference room. He set up tents, and we slept under the trees. My dad was a great cook. On Christmas, he would make a huge breakfast of waffles, pancakes, eggs with Yukon syrup, smoothies, and more. It was such a feast. He was always looking for ways to make us laugh, so he created a scavenger hunt to find our last gifts. He started a new tradition called Cut the Tree in Tabiona. We would go into God's living room, as Dad would say, and cut a tree down. And the bigger the better, even if we had to cut it down to get it through the door. My dad will always be my hero, and is the greatest teacher and man I have ever known. My respect goes deep for him. When I was feeling sad, he would comfort me. When I was hurt, he would put oils on me and then pray to God for me. I miss that strength and love that I felt with him. I will cherish these wonderful memories throughout the rest of my life. Thank you for your love and support for me and my family. As long as we remember all that my dad has done and follow his example, his dream and vision will live in all of us. I ask you to please bow your heads with me in a moment of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, our gracious and loyal Father, thank you for bringing all these wonderful people here today to celebrate the life of my father. We're thankful we could share our lives with my father, Gary Young. We're grateful for all that he has done for the world, for his great gifts and talents. We ask you to watch over us through this difficult situation so we can get through it. We ask you to give us strength, courage to go forward and carry Dad's mission to the world. May we follow Dad's example of showing love and kindness to each other. Be with us this day. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. If I can invite the Young Living executives to join me on stage. We are going to kick off an International Day of Life to honor Gary. What we would encourage each and every one of you is to go back to your home and plant something. Cultivate life, just like Gary has done for so many years and has taught us to do. So for those of you here, internationally, we now have over 100,000 who have joined us. Many more who will join us later as their day just begins. But we hope that symbolically, each and every one of us can embrace life, can be cultivators of life, creators of life, and make the world a better place just as Gary did for us. Will the audience please stand?